These images posted on social media show bright orange magma building up at the summit of a Philippine volcano. Mount Mayon has been emitting ash, mud and rocks over the weekend. A leading volcano expert in the country's warned an eruption could take place within weeks or even days. More than 9,000 people have evacuated nearby villages, with local authorities raising the alert to level 3 Sunday night. This warns an eruption is likely. The volcano is a popular tourist attraction in the central Albay province. Several flights have been cancelled from the nearby capital city Manila as a result of the volcanic activity.
3 people ages 2 to 28 are still listed as missing after last week's deadly Southern California mudslides. Emergency officials said hopes were diminishing that they would pull more survivors from the destroyed landscape. The mudslides scoured the affluent community of Montecito, 85 miles northwest of Los Angeles. 20 people were killed, the greatest loss of life from a California mudslide in at least 13 years. As a precaution against further slides, officials have ordered residents in most of the southeastern corner of Montecito to leave their homes for what was likely to be 1 or 2 weeks.
On Monday, Turkey's Tayyip Erdogan threatened to strangle a planned 30,000-strong U.S.-backed force in Syria before it's even born. This as Washington's backing 4 Kurdish fighters drove a wedge into relations with one of its main Middle East allies. On Sunday, the United States announced its support for plans for a border force to defend territory held by U.S.-backed Kurdish-led fighters in northern Syria. On Monday, the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad responded by vowing to crush the new force and drive U.S. troops from the country. Assad's ally Russia called the plans a plot to dismember Syria and placed part of it under U.S. control.
Japan's public broadcaster raised a false alarm about a North Korean missile test. It comes just days after a similar mistake in Hawaii. Japan has been preparing for an attack from North Korea. The broadcaster sent a push alert to users of its disaster prevention app, warning them of an imminent launch from Kim Jong-un's regime. But soon after, NHK said the warning was raised incorrectly and it apologized. The false alarm in Japan is a sign of increased tension over North Korea's military aggression. Pyongyang fired intercontinental ballistic missiles towards Japan and fired missiles over Japan's territory in 2017.
The U.S.-led coalition in Syria acknowledged on Sunday that it's training a Kurdish-dominated border security force to operate in northern and eastern parts of Syria. And the move has enraged Russia and Turkey. Russian State Duma Defense Committee Chairman Vladimir Shamanov on Sunday threatened to undertake certain measures, according to a report from the Russian state media outlet Sputnik. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan vowed on Monday to strangle it before it's even born. Half of the 30,000-strong BSF will be made up of Syrian Democratic Forces veterans, fresh off their long fight against ISIS, while the other half are currently being recruited and trained. The BSF will deploy to the northern border with Turkey, the southeastern border with Iraq, and along the Euphrates River, which acts as a border between the U.S.-backed SDF and Syrian regime and Russian forces.
Chelsea Manning confirmed that she is a candidate for U.S. Senate. 3 days after making her intention known to federal election officials, Manning tweeted, "Yep, we're running for Senate," with an attached campaign video indicating her intention to run in the 2018 Maryland Democratic primary. She sent a subsequent tweet seeking donations to her campaign. The 30-year-old Manning filed her statement of candidacy with the Federal Election Commission. Known as Bradley Manning at the time of her 2010 arrest, the former Army intelligence analyst was convicted of leaking classified documents to the anti-secrecy website WikiLeaks.
The New York Times reports that at least 12 people were wounded after a knife attack on a school in the city of Perm in central Russia. According to reports, 2 masked teenagers, one a current student of the school and the other a former student, entered the back entrance of School 127 and broke into a 4th-grade classroom. There, they proceeded to stab students and teachers. According to one witness, the teenagers said they were going to slaughter everyone. 12 people were taken to the hospital with stab wounds. 2 students and 1 teacher suffered serious wounds. The 2 attackers were wounded as well.
India and Israel have signed several agreements strengthening ties with one another. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu landed in New Delhi on January 15th, kicking off a 6-day visit to India. Modi greeted Netanyahu on the tarmac with a big hug. Netanyahu later told reporters, quote, "This is the dawn of a new era in the great friendship between India and Israel." By the end of the day, the two leaders had signed deals in defense, trade, energy, science, and agriculture. Reuters reports Israel has given initial approval for Indian energy companies to explore for oil and gas in the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the BBC reports Modi has said he wants Israeli defense companies to invest in India. The rampant strengthening of ties comes 25 years after India and Israel first opened diplomatic ties at all. Netanyahu's visit will also include a stop to the Taj Mahal on Tuesday. For United News International, I'm Yuli Uni.
Survives at the mercy of the Mekong River. He and members of Cambodia's Cham Muslim community live on houseboats. Fishing is at the center of life here, but the size of the catch is shrinking by the year.
In the past, there were lots of fish. Now there are fewer and there are more fishing tools and boats. Our Cham people have no other businesses but fishing.
Every day, though, fishermen keep trying.
Although there is no many fish, we still keep fishing because we don't have other jobs to do. We have no land to farm, so we just live on the boat forever.
It's a similar story for villagers living along the Mekong in Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. At 4,800 kilometers, the Mekong River is the world's largest inland fishery, and it helps feed roughly 60 million people. But that way of life is changing.
Some people say it's because of the construction of dams, but I don't know.
Control of the river's tap rests to the north in China. Beijing has built 6 dams and is investing in the construction of 6 more. Environmental groups warn these pose a grave threat to fish habitats by disrupting migrations and the flow of key nutrients. China's thirst for electricity is having a big impact on the Mekong, not just in China, but for the millions more who depend on it. Stacey Bivens, TRT World.
According to U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, there was no indication that North Korea reacted after the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency incorrectly sent an alert Saturday warning of an imminent ballistic missile strike against the islands. Thousands of tourists and residents in Hawaii received mobile alerts on their phones that a missile would soon be impacting the state. As tensions mount over the country's ballistic missile program, the false alarm provoked panic.
An ordinary house in a California subdivision concealed a bizarre and disturbing case of torture and child abuse, police say. In a press release, the Riverside County Sheriff's Office says a 17-year-old girl called 911 early Sunday morning after escaping a home in Paris and told police her 12 siblings were being held captive by their parents. Police say that inside the residence they found several malnourished and dirty children shackled to their beds with chains and padlocks in dark and foul-smelling surroundings. And parents David and Louise Turpin were unable to provide a logical reason why they...
As a vote to pass contested reforms in the Greek parliament took place, a group of demonstrators tried to enter the building but were forced back by police. From early evening, around 20,000 people had gathered in central Athens, overcoming the city's transport strike to show their anger at yet more austerity measures and labour reforms. Our reporter says demonstrators arrived peacefully in front of the parliament. However, once again, Molotov cocktails, stones and tear gas have turned Syntagma Square into a battlefield. Minutes before, trade union members had marched up to Parliament. Their main grievance is the change to labour laws, making it harder for unions to call strikes. Lazanos Andrianos is a university student. He says if the government's continuing austerity programme is the only choice, then there is no alternative for us other than to fight back, to demonstrate and to work for a better future. This is the biggest challenge for my generation. The situation is unbearable. Around 500,000 young educated Greeks have already left the country in order to find jobs. All eyes are now on August, which hopefully will mark the end of Greece's bailout era.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is accusing the US of undermining the nuclear deal between Iran and other world powers. It comes after President Trump said he'd lift imposed sanctions against Iran that are aiming to curb their nuclear missile program. As a first step, we propose that everyone calm down and freeze any confrontational activity. First of all, military undertakings, be they missile launches, nuclear tests, or large military maneuvers. In recent days, Trump has said he wants flaws in the 2015 nuclear deal fixed within 120 days. What the US are trying to do now is basically change the wording of an agreement, including things which will be absolutely unacceptable for Iran, and we will not support them. And if the US really slam the door, then I don't even want to think about the consequences, because surely in that situation Iran won't consider itself bound.
Sudanese police here are trying to plug the gap in the border and stop smuggling into Eritrea. Police say all these goods, including cars, food and other items, were about to be smuggled. People and weapons are also being trafficked.
It's an illegal trade, so they don't go through the official borders, which creates a gap in the products for the people living here. These are Sudanese products, subsidies products, that are smuggled to neighboring countries, so we are trying to stop this illegal trade.
Sudan and Eritrea share around 600 kilometers of land border. Most of it is open. The recent announcement of a state of emergency in Kassala saw the closure of all official crossing points and Sudanese military forces deployed along the border. This border is one of 3 official crossings between Sudan and Eritrea. Since the Sudanese government declared a state of emergency more than a week ago, this area has been closed just like the other 2. And while that may have been done as part of a disarmament and anti-smuggling campaign here in Kassala state, geopolitical tensions also seem to play a role in the border closure. Tensions between Egypt and Sudan's neighbor Ethiopia have recently widened to include Sudan and Eritrea. Sudan supports the largest hydroelectric dam project in Africa and has increased military forces in Kassala. Egyptians fear the dam will slow the flow of water in the River Nile. Some Sudanese fear Eritrea may back Egypt in any conflict over the dam.
When we declared a state of emergency, we closed the borders. It means what it means. I can't tell if Egyptian forces are stationed in Eritrea or not, but as a nation we take precautions for our national security. So we closed the border, and with the state of emergency, it's natural to have military forces on the border just as a precaution for national security.
Eritrea says it's not hosting foreign forces and the deployment of Sudanese forces was unnecessary.
What is said that Egypt has weapons in Eritrea and soldiers is fabricated news, created by the Sudanese intelligence to justify the joint deployment forces between the 2 countries in the state of Kassala on Eritrea's border. It's an attempt for them to escape from their internal issues.
Sudan's eastern borders have always been a security challenge. Now with the state of emergency and the increased military force, Sudan is hoping for an improvement. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, on the border between Sudan and Eritrea.
Last week, a suggestion that diplomacy may have a chance, as representatives from South Korea and the North met for the first time in 2 years. And this week in Canada, more than a dozen diplomats are gathering at a conference co-hosted by the U.S. The participants, largely representing so-called sending states, countries that sent forces in support of the South's fight against Pyongyang during the Korean War in the 1950s.
We use this gathering as an opportunity to advance our work on diplomatic efforts towards a more peaceful, prosperous, and nuclear-free future on the North Korean peninsula, and to demonstrate international solidarity in our condemnation of North Korea's actions.
We will not accept you as a nuclear nation, a nuclear weapons nation, and that all of us share one policy and one goal, and that is the full, complete, verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Rex Tillerson, the U.S. Secretary of State, said the Vancouver conference is about sending a unified message from the international community. But noticeably absent from this week's gathering are Russia and China. Both border the DPRK and both have veto power on the UN Security Council.
Whether Canada has invited us or not is not important. In a context that all relevant parties are proactively discussing how to properly handle the peninsula issue, it is strange that some relevant parties are using Cold War approaches. So from the beginning, China believes such a meeting is meaningless, and we are resolutely opposed to it.
China favors the UN Security Council and the 6-party talks, which include Pyongyang and Seoul. Beijing hosted the talks until they broke down nearly a decade ago.
The Canadians and the Americans announced back in December that the conference would take place. There's been some disagreement about the invite list, but critics, including Japan, which is attending, say the approach may not be relevant if the relevant players aren't here. The burden is now on the hosts to prove otherwise. Rowie Ruttenberg, CGTN in Vancouver.
Reinforced on a mission to defend its borders, Turkey's military has deployed extensive artillery in preparation for an assault on YPG militants stationed in Afrin, likely to occur within days.
We previously spoiled the game played in Iraq. With Euphrates Shield, we stuck a dagger into the heart of the game played in Syria. One by one, we will destroy all terror cells in Syria, starting soon in Afrin and Manbij. Those who try to stab us in our back while appearing to be our allies cannot stop us, nor those who support marginal terrorists with a politician-like appearance. They cannot stop us.
Turkey engaging in an offensive against the YPG could further impact what are currently sensitive relations between Turkey and the United States. Nevertheless, the YPG is closely affiliated to the PKK terror group, whose terror campaign against Turkey has led to the deaths of more than 40,000 security forces and civilians over the last 30 years.
Turks have been in Idlib since October 2017, and they were there mainly as part of a peacekeeping and containment mission. Now, they don't want direct engagement, but if the YPG persists on attacking opposition forces and advancing towards the Turkish border, Turkey will protect its borders at all costs.
Since the demise of Daesh in northern Syria, the YPG has sought to link the territory that it controls to the east of the Euphrates River to Afrin. The group has the backing of the United States, which wants to increase the size of the force to 30,000. It is understood that the YPG are collaborating with PKK terrorists in the Amenos region of Turkey. Now, their combined intention is to pave the way for the creation of a future state, spanning all the way across to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Turkish forces are poised ready to disrupt this from happening. The proposed efforts to crack down on the YPG have been welcomed by Kurdish Syrian refugees who one day hope to return home.
Of course we are against the YPG because they are creating trouble. The war continues because of it. Their existence there makes us feel uncomfortable. They are always causing trouble in Syria. We hope to return to our country.
Russia has previously shown support for the YPG, but given Turkey's strategic role in the Syrian peace talks, as well as hosting millions of Syrian refugees, Turkish military operations in Afrin are unlikely to impact on both nations' participation in the Syrian peace talks. What is speculative for now is just how the United States will react. Joseph Hyatt, TRT World.
In Jerusalem, Palestinian leaders have called on the Palestinian Liberation Organization to suspend its recognition of Israel. The move comes just days after Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas urged the group to revise its agreements with the Jewish state. Abbas is head of the PLO. The PLO formally represents all Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership has ratcheted up its criticism of Israel and the U.S. since President Donald Trump's controversial announcement that Washington recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital. On Monday, a PLO Central Council statement called on the organization to suspend its recognition of Israel, first affirmed by the Palestinian body in 1993, until Israel recognized the state of Palestine based on borders that existed before the Six-Day War of 1967.
Sometimes sports must take a back seat to sportsmanship. That's why we bring you these remarkable images from a February 25th match between two mid-table teams in the Czech League, Bohemians 1905 and Slovácko. Bohemians goalkeeper Martin Berkovic crashed into a teammate while both raced after a loose ball. Berkovic was knocked out and choking on his tongue. Francis Kone, a player for the opposing side, sprang into action, immediately reached his fingers down the goalie's throat and kept his airway open until medics arrived on the pitch. Berkovic was rushed to a Prague hospital and eventually released. He later posted his heartfelt thanks to Kone on Facebook, thanking the Togo international for saving his life. The teams went on to a scoreless draw. Kone, meanwhile, told Czech media that this was probably the 4th time he's done something similar. Who knew a striker would make the best save of the day? For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.